So that AARC, we're going to do acronyms here in a minute, Brenda. That first word is administrative ARC. So that turns it into a different group of people that are around the table. And like Brenda said, the superintendent is forced then to be the chairperson. And so it's very important that we keep our superintendents updated and abreast of all the information. Of course, they know the information. They've been involved in it many years, most of the time, and so we, as directors, we just support that the best we can. But certainly, but yes. So go ahead, Brenda. You're saying AARC, and then and
we have fresh off the press. City Hall is a task group, and last year they updated the different types of meetings, and these are agendas. If you follow those, it tells you exactly what to have to prepare you for that meeting. So you just have to show up, have this, make sure you have all your little things. This is for like all ARC meetings, for all of them. And then you're going to like your initial referrals, and that's, some districts are having a little issues with referrals, and we have a great, some great resources for that if you all ever need that. Dion just made a fresh, matter of fact, a couple or 3 days ago, she filled out a referral. So that way you all will have an exemplar to help you to make sure everything is done. When we look at them, sometimes it's not all completed, or they've got all the tier strategies, the dates are the same, and those types of things. Well, that can't be. So, we've got that for you, so if y'all need that. And of course, it just keeps on going. And then the last thing it talks about, and some of our districts are being deemed on that manifestation determination. So there's 2 pages of that. So you've got the front and you got another page behind it that talks about that manifestation determination. And if you follow this, you won't have any problems. You won't have any problems. Sometimes manifestation determinations were forgotten. And when they're forgotten and you change that child's placement, then if the State Department sees that as they're looking through files, then they're going to contact you. And you could very well be on a CAT. We've had some districts that's been on a CAT because of that. Now, I want to state that Teresa Combs has always told us that if the parents and the district agrees for the change of placement to be that 45-day alternative school, that you didn't have to do this. I am here to say that the State Department, no matter what, and Teresa's right, but they're dinging people on it, so we need to make sure that we go ahead and do that manifestation determination so it's out of hot water. So I just want to share that, and I will make copies and hand them out.
Yeah, and let me go ahead and just add too, I think doing the manifestation determination review and then documenting that the parent is in agreement with the change is vital to connect those dots.
Your conference summary is vital.
Yes.
Everything you talk about, you need to put it in that conference summary. If it's not there, it didn't happen. So if it goes into litigation, the first thing they look at with policies and procedures for your district, they look at the child's IEP conference summary, those types of things, and then that's what they get you. They're looking at and say, well, you didn't talk about it. It didn't happen. So we have to make sure that we do our conference summaries, And it's hard because sometimes it's the special ed teacher doing the typing, and they're trying to talk and type at the same time. I know how to do that. So we just to make sure when we read it and go over it at the end, that if there's anything that's been missed, and sometimes, I would just bullet things. As I would type, I would bullet them so I could look and see what it is, so we miss something. Because, we've all been there. We've had some pretty messy ARC meetings, and I've had some pretty messy AARC meetings that I had to chair. And then I've been with districts that have been in mediation and court and all that type of stuff. But we want to try to stay out of that if we can. We want to stay out of that. But we will get you these, and we will actually send them to you electronic because there's hyperlinks in here.
They already have it. I'll send them to
Okay, you send them to district.
Yes.
Good. He's right on the ball.
Yeah.
All right, so you have those electronic, so there's hyperlinks in there that will help you all as well.
Yeah, we hit reply to all on the information email and just went ahead and sent the presentation and everything yesterday. So I want to pose a well, actually, I want to make a statement to start our discussion this morning, and I really want it to be a discussion. I want it to be a discussion where you're really reflecting on what's going on with you and what's happening in your world, and I want you to think and frame all the new learning in that, or it may be an update, or it may be a review of learning that you've already had. But I want to say this. I know as principals and as directors, we're very, very, very conscious of the culture that is in our schools, and I may be telling you something you already know, but I'm just going to say this: if your culture is struggling, or if you're in the middle of a change initiative and you're having folks that are not jumping on board readily, the one thing that you can do, in my opinion, is you can make decisions a priority. You can make it a priority to make decisions where you put the student first in the decision making. You want to change your culture. You want to change the attitude. Now, you're always going to have naysayers, no matter what you do. If you're trying to do something well and do it good and do it for the betterment of your school, you're always going to have people that are going to detract from that. But what I'm saying to you, you can't go wrong when you put children first. And I believe that. I'm a firm believer that in so many ways, and what am I talking about here? You guys are administrators. What am I talking about? You're chairpersons. You have something in terms of culture and decision making and where I'm going with this. And it lends itself to, you know what? It's hard to argue with. When I would have an ARC meeting, I'll use this little thing right here. When I'd have an ARC meeting, let's say this is the center of the room, I would put a little thing right there in the center of the room, and I'd say, you know what that's indicative of? That's indicative of the student that we're working with and working on and working about today. And unless we are prepared to keep that focus, then, I just do not have the meeting. Because, and I think it goes back to, and I think Brenda would agree, it goes back to planning. You were talking about planning this morning when we were having our pre-conversation. We're planning right now. We're in the planning stages for a new school year, and everything's exciting and everything's new. It's like getting up in the morning, and you've had that good night's rest, and today's a new day, and things are going to be better. Things are going to be better. We're going to strive to make things better. But if we can keep children in the focal point, and the decisions that we make, and yes, absolutely, that's the other thing that is going to change your culture. Had a discussion yesterday with a director, a transition consultant, and an assistant director, and we were talking about the very thing. And we can write the prettiest IEP, we can write the prettiest conference summary from an ARC meeting, we can write the nicest plans or lessons, but unless we love our children, and unless we invest time and let them know that we care about them, it falls short. I don't care what you're doing. And unless you're looking at that cup you're drinking out of as every child, the cup is not empty, but it's full. The vessel's full. We got to find what button to push and what relationship to make and what information we need to help assist. And one of the things I do, I teach a class over at Alice Lloyd in the spring for general education teachers, and Sydney's heard me talk about this. But I say to them, hey, if I lined everybody up in this room along the back wall, I say this the first night, invariably there would be some folks that would do some things well, certain things, and not so well. And I think we're all like that. And we forget that sometimes as we are successful and have, move through school and get degreed and all kinds of things, and we get a little ego or full of ourselves, and we forget that there's some things that we didn't do so well in school. Maybe there's some things that we didn't excel in probably. And I also say this to them. I say, before you make an opinion, just remember that if we live, or if we're blessed to live long enough, if we're blessed to live long enough, there's a good chance that we're going to end up with that vehicle that has the tag on it. You know the one I'm talking about, the one that allows us to park closer to the door. There's a good chance that we're going to lose sight. We're going to lose hearing. We're going to lose our ability to move. And so let's not be so hard, and let's not be so forgetful that those realities are part of our world, and that every individual is different. We have to find the button to push. And I'm glad you brought up relationships, because I probably wouldn't have brought that up exactly in that sense. But I that is so key. It's so key. Without any further things, I just want to kind of frame what we're going to do today. I just want to talk about a little bit about what. So everybody's had a chance to. Thank you, Dana. All right.
We feed off each other.
Yes.
We pretty much know each other's ending sentences.
We've got this thing here that we're going to talk about. But I want to kind of give you an overview before we get in. We talk about good teaching, learning targets, whatnot. But we're really going to just kind of look at what we need to have as an ARC chairperson. We're going to talk about the law. We're going to talk about documentation. We're going to talk about some no-nos, some pitfalls. We're going to talk about special education where in its proper context, in terms of how it can really help thrive. Put it in proper context. We're able to deliver what we need to be delivering for students. And so when we're in a classroom, we're working with teachers, we want to see those teachers teaching to them. I want you to consider this question. We can try to get back on track here. I want you to consider this question as we get started. What do you think? Just have a discussion. Just first of all, here's the kind of way we'd like to do these questions. I want you to think of it on your own. And then once you get your 3 things down on your paper, then have a discussion with your elbow partner there. And it's perfectly set up today. We've got 4 people in here. And so it's perfectly set up for you to have a discussion. So just kind of think through that. What do you think the 3 purposes? What are the main things that we need to be doing to deliver special education to students within our buildings? And I'll give you just a minute. Just talk to me here a little bit about what you guys thought.
So our biggest thing was talking about meeting the needs of the kids, and then also providing those services to make sure that child's successful. And then the third part was monitoring 1 and 2 to make sure that's happening. And that usually comes through the IEP and that yearly review, and then once we reeval and all that stuff.
Thank you so much. And so one of the things I say all the time is if you don't monitor, it doesn't get done. Lots of times with humans, we find other things that are priority list and that type of thing. But the other thing I want to say is all the things you said, does it go back to our first point about culture? If we're planning ahead, if we're putting our students that have the most needs first, and we're figuring out what we're going to do. And so as chairpersons and as leaders in your school, I implore you, like he said, we have specially designed instruction in our lesson plans. And I know I've had conversations with Sydney where we're headed with some of the things that are going on in Knott County as well. It's just so important that we consider the need. If we make it a priority to take care of the students that have the most needs first, everything else seems to fall in place a little better. And if we plan lessons that way as teachers, everything falls into place a little bit. Because I'm gonna say this in Universal Design for Learning. It's one thing it's taught me is if you hit the corners, you'll get the kids down the middle, right? The kids down the middle sometimes are going to learn in spite of the instruction, right? So when you look at your core instruction, you say, okay, what are you doing to plan for differences? That would be my first question I ask my teachers. What are you doing to plan for differences? Because, like I said, to go back to that first thing I told you, if I lined you all up, we'd all have differences. I'm not a great math student. I have to work at it. I have to put a little more time in. I know that I'm a talker. I'm not someone that's going to sit quiet. I have to talk things out. And that's how I learn. I have to walk when I've got to where movement incorporated into the classroom. And it never ceases to amaze me when I go into a classroom And I'm observing teachers, and got little ones, 6 years old, 7 years old, and they're expected to sit there for 3 hours. I mean, what are we doing, right? Their attention span at the height of it is about 18 minutes. If they're just knocking the top out of being a good kid, you know what I'm saying, as far as being compliant, being able to sit still. But when I talked to our good friend Doug Smith about complying, a 6-year-old usually has about a 6 minute. It's about tit for tat with the age to the amount of time that they can sit still. So if we plan our activities for those differences, and if we plan our programs for those differences, it seems like our culture's better. And it goes back to what we're talking about, keeping that kid in the middle of the table, right? When we're having ARC meetings, keeping the kid in the middle of the table. So what did you guys have? Did you have anything different from what it's basically the same, wasn't it? Pretty much. Provide access, make progress. Yeah, and so, okay, the elephant in the room. If we had to talk about the elephant in the room in documentation, what would you think? Where am I headed with that? Progress monitoring. Are we doing data? Go back to my conversation yesterday when we're talking about transition. Are we capturing the outcomes of transition services? As high school folks, and I don't know how many are in it. Most of your elementary, right? And then you've got a director. But if you're a high school person, you have to look at what's in that transition present level to see that there's some outcomes from those services. And so, it's very, very vital that we think that way in order for, especially in 2024, it's very vital that we think, hey, what can we do to really, really consider special education as a part of our program, not as a part of our program, but as it is inclusive. Talk to me just a little bit about, not to put you on the spot here, but you said some good things about how your planning has to go with your classes and where your kids are going, and how many, what you can do with co-teaching.
Well, I guess it kind of starts several years ago. We were identified TSI for special education. And I thought we had it figured out before that. And that was like a slap in the face, because I thought, well, maybe we don't have it figured out. So we had to really take a hard look at what we were doing to see what happened. Now, I'm proud to say we're far from that now in a short amount of time, because we did have the structure in place, but it wasn't being implemented correctly. And so I think we started to develop a special education PLC meeting specifically for those teachers. And then we had them involved in the regular PLC meetings too. So they were getting a voice separate and at the table with everybody else. So one of the things that we found early was, how are we giving assessments? That was a big push for us. Are we making sure we're meeting the needs of those kids? Are their accommodations being met? Those types of things. Are the regular education teachers involved in that process? And then the other thing that we had always talked about was scheduling. So when we schedule our kids, we have 4 classrooms per grade level. We can't spread those kids in 4 different classes and expect to have effective co-teaching going on throughout the week. And so we have to meet the requirements of the IEP. So if we put in 60 minutes of co-teaching a week and we don't get there, that's a problem. So we had to make sure that we provide a structure with the way the kids were grouped, so that effective co-teaching could take place in our building. So we make sure that we don't spread those kids out so far that teacher can't get to those kids. And we're blessed enough to have one special education teacher per grade level. So that helps us. And that's always been the case, but we have a high enough population that we have to do that. So that allows them to kind of move between those 2 classes where those kids are and work with those kids. And then they also get their resource time on top of that. So just making sure you have structures in place and you're planning and thinking ahead before this becomes a problem down the road. So, but our scores really skyrocketed once we made a few changes to what we were doing and started monitoring a little more closely. And, we have very capable people. It just wasn't showing in the results.
And I think it's very important. What I hear you say is you just hit FAPE. You just hit that, the appropriateness of the program. You're monitoring the program. You're implementing the program. You're checking on it. You've got some accountability with your SDI being built into your lesson plans. And so when you do it that way you can really see growth. And I want you to think back to when you were a student. Any of you taking classes right now? Or are you past that phase in your life? Any of you taking classes? Okay, so I want to say, I don't want you as educators to ever forget what it was like to be a student. And I want your teachers to understand, and I want the people that you're leading to understand how important it is that we build scaffolds in for our kids, that we build examples in, that we give them the exemplar, that I do it for them for a while. And we do it, and we do it, and we do it, and we do it with our students that have more significant needs. We need to do a lot of we do it's, right? Before we turn them to independence and where they're doing it on their own, right? I do it, you do it, we do it. I do it, we do it, you do it. That's the correct, right? So we got to think about, as we provide faith, what's appropriate. Okay, so number one, if we're looking at this slide and we're looking at the textbook answer, I guess maybe, we're talking about free appropriate public education here, okay? We're talking about what makes our programs appropriate. And the number one thing we have to do is we have to assess correctly. You said it. You said it in your answer. We have to assess correctly. We have to know what their current level of functioning is, and we have to meet them where they are, right? And we can't look at that glass as being half empty. We have to look at it as being half full, and we have to provide them with appropriate, ambitious, meaningful strategies and services that are going to move them, okay? That's the only way we're going to do it. And we have to monitor it. And we have to check on it. And procedurally, as far as special education is concerned, I was listening to a podcast this morning on my commute, and the lady said, you know what? You may not think it's important to give the parents in that ARC meeting the procedural safeguards. What is that? The parent rights. But there's about 4 times you're supposed to do that, and one of those times is when a manifestation determination review that Brenda mentioned. If you're changing a student's placement, you're supposed to give the parents the parent rights. So that procedural process of doing things and checking the boxes is also important sometimes, isn't it, Sydney? I mean, we get hung up sometimes, and one little mishap can lead to a blow up that can take years of your life, right? And you talked about TSI and CSI schools, in the law, and we're going to look at a couple of slides on law here in just a second. That's all rooted in ESSA law, right? If students with disabilities are not making progress, then schools are going to fall into these categories, and they're going to get a lot of visitors. We'll just say it that way. You're going to get a lot of visitors, right? And sometimes that makes people uncomfortable, but sometimes the process with corrective action plans and TSI situations can improve the process for us because it puts us on our toes a little bit, or as Anita Archer likes to say, put us on our toes, So we raise up on and we pay attention a little bit more. But great answers from you guys. Great answers. That slide, I think we've worn it out. So number one, we're looking at what's appropriate for kids and how do we determine what's appropriate. Number two, are we monitoring and implementing? Number three, are we taking care of the procedures? Are we giving students, and you all said another word over here, access. One of the things I want to say to you is if you are really doing a great job with MTSS and you're really doing a great job with providing students what they need when they need equitable resources and services, your numbers should go down a little bit in terms of special education identification, because lots of times we have students in special education that only need accommodations. And where should those kids fall along the continuum? If we have a student that has a medical condition and the medicine can mitigate that, like these eyeglasses I wear, let me tell you something. I couldn't do this today without these, right? But when I put them on, I can do it, right? So the same thing with kids. If we can put a assistive technology in their hands, or if we can put an accommodation in place, maybe they don't need specially designed instruction. And as ARC chairpersons, do we know what specially designed instruction is? I heard you say you have it in the lesson plan. So I'm betting you know that it's different from core instruction. It's different from differentiation. It's different from universal design for learning. It is more intense. It's intentional toward a goal. It produces progress. And so we have to do all those things to provide those services the way they need to be provided. Okay.
To answer his question, 504 is a foundation.
That's exactly. Yes. Yes, and that's why I said we work well together, because sometimes I forget to finish my thought because I get caught up and get so excited in telling you what I want you to know. But really, if we're over identifying in our districts and we're in danger of falling into CCEIS and things of that nature, that's another mechanism that's in place from the federal level on down that looks at, are we under-identifying or are we over-identifying? We went through a period where everybody said, well, I'm not doing that. Not referring kids. It's too much work. You're asking me to do too much. And we under-identify, and we got kids out there that are not getting what they need. So we got to it's like Baby Bear's porridge. We got to get it just right. We got to figure out where these kids are and what they need and provide what they need, rather than just trying to blanketly do something. Blanketly put them into co-teaching. Blanketly put them into resource rooms. I go back to, I was thinking about reflecting over my career, and in 1991 I was a teacher at Belfry High School, and I don't care to tell you, we had all resources, all resource rooms. All of our special needs kids had basic math, they had basic reading, they had basic social studies, they had basic science, and that's the way we thought it was supposed to be done. And then in the fall of 1991, the principal walks in and said, we're going to full inclusion. So we flipped the grid from one to the other. So all of a sudden you're in a classroom, you got 40 kids, 2 teachers, no training. That's a little harsh, right? But really, the answer here is to find the happy medium there between the two, right? We got to have all those options open, and we got to find the options that are appropriate. We got to have some students need 504, some need just a little accommodation, some need just a helpful push, and some need lots of things, right? So we got to figure that out. And as to what special education and what the purpose is, like Brenda said, it's layered on top of all those things, and it's a vehicle to close gaps. Go ahead.
The documentation required for an IEP. What documentation do you need for a 504?
What documentation do you need for a 504? You cannot require a doctor's note, according to Teresa Combs, in a school. You cannot, as a school system, you can't. When you look at the 504, you only have to. I think the minimum of it is, it says that you have to be known to have a major life impairment that keeps you from doing things in life, the major life activities. So you cannot, as a school district, require that a student have a doctor's note or a doctor's diagnosis in order to have a 504. Well,
that was like 7 or 8 years ago. They added in an academic
They
and
did.
a lot of teachers are looking at that. And we're looking more at the evidence at the school level.
So the progress monitoring that we use.
And the assessments.
And sometimes if you're testing for special ed and they don't qualify, they're right there, but they don't qualify, then maybe 504 could be something, because they do get accommodation.
We've done some of that. So that's come up in conversation about having that doctor's statement. That's what we have to have. We have all the assessments. They've done the assessments on the kid, because in most cases they're being assessed, whether they should have received special education services or not.
Right.
But that's been a big sticking point in our district. I don't know if you all experience that.
What I'm finding is, we go out into all the districts, KVEC areas. What I'm finding is we're over identifying OHI in the area of ADHD. As we read through those IEPs, they're not on medication, and then they mark the box, the consideration factor, the behavior. It's not marked, it's marked no. And you're wondering, if that kid was that bad of a behavior with ADHD, they would remember to mark that box, and then they don't have a behavior goal. So, red flags.
COVID hasn't helped either.
Well, that's true.
Because we misidentified based around that. So that's hurt us too, but that should start to.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we said, hey, whoa, put the brakes on here a little bit. We've not been in school, for large amounts of time. And when we look at the eligibility forms, one of the things it says down on the bottom of the eligibility form is, have you had proper experiences in reading and math? If you haven't had if you can't document the proper experiences, the kid's been in school the proper amount of time, they've had, and your core instruction's doing what it needs to do, and particularly in TSI and CSI schools, you have to really be careful about that, putting kids in special ed when maybe your core instruction might be, or if you've got an inverted pyramid where your tier 3 and your tier 2 are the bulk of your population. You see, so when you got that inverted pyramid, you have to look at your core instruction. You got to shore those practices up around the standards. And so here's what I want to do right now.
The history of special education. In the United States today, all students with disabilities have the right to special education services and a free public education. These children are protected by laws. Students classified as having disabilities are afforded accommodations and modifications. Accommodations are related to access of content, while modifications allow for changes to content. No doubt, these students benefit greatly from them today. However, this wasn't always the case. It was only with the help of certain advocacy groups. These advocacy groups were usually formed by parents of students with special needs and other members of that community. The advocacy groups lobbied and fought for these children by bringing their plight to the public eye, as well as putting pressure on local and state politicians. They got the public involved. Now, let's look at a quick outline of events beginning in the early 1800s that led to the achievements of today. Years ago, most students with disabilities did not attend school, and in most cases, they were not accepted to schools. There are exceptions where some parents would have to pay money to get their child into private schools or pay for private tutors. Let's move along to the 1850s, where a growing number of isolated schools for students with disabilities were available. These schools were mostly in rural areas, but were moving in the right direction. Moving toward the 1880s, we sort of took a step back for disabled children. Scientist Francis Galton spread the ideas of eugenics, which discussed the sterilization of disabled individuals. Individuals with disabilities began being placed in institutions, many of which provided conditions similar to a jail. Let's fast forward to the 1920s, and the good news is that more and more children with disabilities were finding their way into public schools. Yet almost all were in separate classes and kept in separate rooms. Then, to an important time, the 1970s, which is really where special education started. Laws were put in place for funding for special education students, and Public Law 94-142 was passed as the foundation for special education. Continuing to the 1990s, where important laws such as IDEA of 1990 was passed, and students had the right to general education curriculum. And if you look at schools today, we see a push towards what is called the inclusion movement, which basically ensures all students with disabilities have the opportunities to participate with non-disabled general education peers. Right now, I want to say thank you for your time. Please like and share this video. Subscribe to the channel. Also, help keep me going with a small contribution.
Okay, so what's your thoughts on that? Have you seen the progression? Most of us have been around since 1990. Most of us, I'll say. And that's really when the legislation took off. We started getting increased funding and the real push. Anyone know kind of what kind of pushed this along? There was really a parallel with another movement in this country that kind of prompted the disabilities movement. Anybody have any idea about what also was going on in the 60s? Yes, the civil rights movement. And so when you think about the civil rights movement, it kind of makes sense that as we extend this, I'll use a church phrase here, the glad hand of fellowship, as we extend our rights to all people, that included students with disabilities, that included people with disabilities. So in 1973, we had the Rehabilitation Act that brought on 504, which we were talking about earlier. And we said we were going to refer to that some today. And So 504 is really about access. And that's why we say, all students that have disabilities have 504 protection. Okay, so there's a thread of an element in the IEP when a student qualifies for specially designed instruction and an IEP. They also have 504 protection, so we have to give them access by providing them with accommodations. So we have to do both for students with IEPs, whereas students with 504 would only get an accommodation plan. And so that was 73. They come with the access to buildings and the access to schools and the access to this and the access to that if you're getting federal funding. Well, funding legislation takes a little while, and so in 1975, they said, well, we've got students that are being denied the right to be in public schools because they have significant needs, and so they went with the Public Law 94-142 in about 1975, and then in 1990, it took another 15 years to really push it and say, hey, they're letting some of our kids into the schools, but they're still separating them. And so we just see this progression, and it's the right thing to do, is to include as much as we can, and to have our students with disabilities feel like they're, like, to borrow a phrase from Brenda, they're regular education students first, and they have a plan. Okay, so 504 kids, they can make progression through the grades. They can make progress that's adequate with accommodations. 504 plan. Okay, and we can help you with some. If you all need resources around that, we can get you some resource guides around that. There's lots of them out there. But the big thing to keep in mind is that if a student can make it with accommodations only, they don't need specially designed instruction. They don't need to be in having an IEP, and they don't need all these other supports, because what we run the risk of doing is further causing problems if we do too much accommodating and too much special services. So, like, again, going back to the analogy of baby bear's porridge, we've got to get it just right. Can't be too hot, can't be too cold. Got to be just right. And so, any thoughts on this? Any thoughts on what we're seeing here? And where do you think we are? Where do you think we are in your school district? Are we where we need to be? Or is it still a work in progress?
No, we're not. I don't think we're where we need to be. I think we're ahead of a lot of other districts, but I don't think. I think you will continue to see improvement across the nation. I mean, you're not at the end of the tracks, I don't think.
All right, thank you.
I think we're way further now than we were when I was in school in the 90s or in late 80s. I mean, it was just different. I mean, we didn't see special education students in my classrooms, when I was in elementary and middle school. So I think about that, and then where we are now, we've really come a long way as a country, as a state, as a region, with help making sure the needs of these kids are met. But we have a lot of work to do still.
Absolutely. And you guys ever knock anything?
I think we've made vast improvements, but we're certainly not where we need to be, and there's always room for growth and to get better. And
I appreciate that so much. So, we talked about, like I said, the elephant in the room. We've got to, and I always say this: what gets monitored gets done. That's it's my favorite thing to say nowadays, since I'm a monitor and compliance person. So we've got to try to figure out ways to also scaffold our teachers and give them supports that are going to allow them to take the data that's going to make the instructional decisions, make the service decisions that need to be made, so that we get it right, that we're doing what we need to be doing. Let's go back. Let's circle back. How'd you guys do on the quiz? How'd we do on the quiz? Oh, I see a lot of papers filled out, and we'll provide you with the answers. But as we go through, if you hear one mentioned, here in our discussion, you go ahead and jot it down, and then we'll come back and maybe take that quiz at the end and see how you do at the end. Okay, as a kind of a pre-post test as far as for how we're doing and getting you guys to pick up on some of the things that we're talking about. But when we talk about ARC meetings, it's important to know the regulations. It's important to know that we got to follow the policies. And the way the legal background is, we start with the federal law idea 2004, and then we also have, from the federal law, we also have state law. Now, the way this works, federal law sets the regulation, and then the state has to comply with all those regulations. Cannot take away from federal law, right, and still receive funding or not get in trouble. So, and our states then can add things to the law. For example, in the state of Kentucky, we have a 14th disability category that a lot of states don't have. Feds don't mandate developmental delay, but we have a developmental delay category that sometimes can be controversial in how we're implementing those things and implementing those programs and what our students are doing once they've been in that program and whether or not it's a successful program. So that's something to think about and look at. And in terms of eligibility, have the kids had proper experiences? Have the kids receive what we would consider good core instruction? And if we're in schools where there's problems like that, then we need to really certainly put the foot down and say, hey, we've got to look inwardly, and we got to say, what are we doing with our instruction, and make sure that we're not over identifying. And so you can add to but can't take away, right? So, and then here, the local district, we have local district policies and procedures. Now, I linked the regulations from the state, and then I think there's a link in there, KentuckyDose.org, will allow you to access your local policies. If you go to that website and you go to ARC Chairperson Resources, you go down just a little ways on there, there's every district has policies and procedures up, and you just have to make sure that those are updated every so often. And we work closely, most of our districts work closely with Teresa Combs to make sure that those things are in their proper place, and we appreciate her contributions for that because she does a tremendous job. And like we were talking to break, she does a tremendous job of looking through the regulations and telling what you have to do in order to be in compliance and that type of thing. But we want this to be a little bit more interactive and a little more discussion driven and a little more friendly to the adult learner in terms of just being able to share your experiences sometimes. And so sometimes, Teresa, she's a great conversationalist. But she's got so much to cover, it's hard to have conversations unless you have a small group. And usually her groups are 400 as opposed to 4. So we certainly give her all the honor and prestige and kudos that she deserves, because she's done a great job. She's been a great resource for us. If your districts, most of your districts, keep her as a resource, and I would say all of KVEC does, yes. And I would say that if you can't get a hold of Brenda or I and ask us, we certainly can get through to her. Or if you can't get through to her, certainly I would implore you to, before you make a decision in an ARC meeting, one of the things that you can do is you can say, push the pause button. So we need to take a pause here. We need some more information. We need more data. And it's your ARC meeting, so it's certainly okay for you to do that. And then get up with one of us, and we can get up with her, or you can get up with her directly to answer those difficult questions. And I'll tell you a story. I like to tell stories. You guys like stories, but I'll tell you a story about, and Brenda's heard this so many different times, I probably have changed the story slightly over the years, but, revisionist history, sometimes comes into play. But honestly, I had an ARC meeting one time, and it lasted a long time. I mean, it started at 4 o'clock, and some of you, if you've been around me, you've heard this story. But it started at 4 o'clock, and it didn't end until about 9. And I made all the mistakes that a rookie can make. As an ARC as a director of special education, ARC chairperson, I was very inexperienced in that regard, and I had a situation where a student, it was questionable as to whether or not she really needed the program or not, that type of thing. We had divorced parents. And it just goes on and on and on and on and on. But the one thing I was able to do was finally get a hold of Brenda, and then we were able to get a hold of Teresa, at different times. And we worked through that process, and it ended up being okay. Okay, so what my point of this story is, not to tell you anything about myself, but just to say, if you need to stop, it's okay to push the pause button and say, what you don't want to do is not reconvene within a reasonable amount of time. So you don't want to let it go 4 months and then come back. You want to say, okay, I need some more data around this particular service you're asking for, or I need some more data around this eligibility piece. And it's certainly okay to do that. And so I wanted to throw that in there while we were talking about what's appropriate and what's allowed. And also, I just want you to think about, with your local policies and procedures, you can have some varied timelines, so you have to pay really, really close attention there. There's some flexibility in there, and so you can add to some of the things that you can require as well. Not all districts require teachers to put special design instruction in the lesson plan, right? That's something that, and the state certainly doesn't say you have to do that, do they, Brenda? So that's something you can add on there. It's about what you think is pertinent to you. And it gives you some flexibility, but you can't forego what the state requires, and you can't forego what the feds are requiring. And so we got to give, at the federal level, we got to give access, and we got to have appropriate programs. We've got to have notice. Appropriate notice. We've got to do those types of things. We've got to make sure that the students have the parent rights have been met, and that we've given the parent rights at the appropriate times, and those types of things. And as we move to the state regulations, those things are all in place too, as well as other things. So, any questions about how the process works? I think that's pretty straightforward, but I think that's just a nice slide there, just to kind of think about the frame our discussion further around. They have rights like consent. They have rights to look at, all the things that are in those procedural safeguards, to be properly notified of meetings, to be properly notified of changes, properly notified when we're going to change their placement, their eligibility, their programs, and those types of things. So certainly it is very important that we understand in documentation. And we're going to hit documentation hard in the second part today. We're really going to look at some of the pitfalls that we've found, because we run around this region all school year supporting teachers and supporting directors and supporting you guys as principals, and looking at what's going on in the documentation. And then we come away with impressions. So we're going to try to give you some of those impressions later. And I'm glad you brought that up, because the procedural safeguards are very, very important. And it's one of those big concepts. It's one of those big concepts. Procedural safeguards need to be given when a parent asks for them, if you change placement, anytime you're having a legal situation where you're going to have a 24-hour meeting, okay, you need to give a procedural safeguard, and you need to give them at the annual review. And have I left anything out? I think that's what the record review document says. And so certainly a good question, huh? Right. Yeah, that one time a year it says shall receive a copy. So that's what we do, and a lot of times they get frustrated with that, and they hand it right back to you because it's a long document. I know that when we were running them off and making them available for our parents, it was like 33 pages of documents, of documentation. So certainly a long document, but it's an important piece to be procedurally sound. Okay, so any questions? Yes. No, it's okay. Certainly, it's okay. It's your meeting as the district. It's your documentation. It's you have the right to control what goes on in there. You do not have to allow someone to be badgered. And certainly, I would encourage you to stop the meeting and give some cool off period. When I was a coach, I coached for almost 3 decades, and I know Brenda coached some, and probably some of you've coached. I always said, I'm not meeting with a parent after a game. We'll meet tomorrow. And I had that, so I think that goes right along with that. Sometimes you need a cool off period, and there's no one, just the respect of the group there. No one has to sit there and be berated and attacked. Just don't have to put up with that. You just don't have to. And so your meetings and Teresa says this all the time, Brenda. It's got to be, every decision you make, you got to have some data to support it. So every decision you make. So if you want to say, you know what, I need more data, nobody can question that you need more data. If you don't feel like, as the chairperson, if you don't feel like you could make a good, sound decision for that student, and remember what we went back and said about the student being in the middle. If you don't have enough, you can always say, and she will tell you that in the trainings, absolutely pause and say, you know what, we need more data. We'll get back together, or we're not going to have an argument here. We're going to keep the student in the middle of the table, And while we know we're talking about things that you're doing for my child, we still do not have to be, we can disagree without being disagreeable, and that's one good thing to tell them. And I think that was a John Wooden adage. And so certainly I think you're on great legal ground there to say we're going to push the pause button. I don't think any administrative law judge in the land is going to tolerate, attacking a teacher or attacking a service provider. Certainly having disagreements, you're going to have those, right? But keeping it professional and respectful is you provide them with their rights, and you talk to them about what they can do if they still have a disagreement. And that's they've got the they can contact the State Department, they can file a complaint, they can go to mediation. There's regulations, there's systemic regulations in place there for if there's a disagreement. But as far as having to, I know our world is such that we try to meet everyone's needs, but that doesn't mean something that's unreasonable. We got to have data to support it, right? If you're going to give an instructional assistant to a student for part of the day, there needs to be data that supports that's going to bring about progress. If it's not going to bring about progress, so then we're not going to do it, right? So we need data, and that's why we need to take data, and we need to make sure that we've got strong data managers that can put that into the process and allow us to make good sound decisions. That we need to have the evidence so that we can, properly implement our programs. And that's absolutely got to document in the conference. Yes, absolutely need to document. Yes, that's a great point. Exactly. You would want to document it, but of course, you wouldn't talk to them in that ARC unless you had somebody taking notes, right? So important that we know that the person that is sitting there beside of us, that if it's and lots of times it falls in the special education teacher's lap because they do a lot of the creation of the documents, and so you got them being the summary recorder, and you're supposed to, as an ARC chairperson, determine who the summary recorder is going to be. So you need to make sure that somebody's taking notes. And you know what? A good piece of advice might be, it might behoove you sometimes to relieve another special ed teacher and have them in there as support taking notes if it's going to be a contentious meeting. You know it ahead of time. Now, sometimes you don't always know that. Like they get mad while they're sitting there, But at the same time, it's a good idea if you're anticipating some problems, to have plenty of people on board that can take notes and make sure that you're capturing the essence of the meeting. And if there's a disagreement, certainly you want to take. Yes. And if you're equipped with the information of what it might look like if you do too much, and you can use that argument. Sometimes that helps, right? Because what you don't want to do is have your kid end up being more dependent through the process. We want to create independence, and when we talk about specially designed instruction, that's certainly one of the things that makes it specially designed instruction. And knowing what specially designed instruction is, as a chairperson, if I had to say what's one of your number one roles, you should, as a chairperson, understand specially designed instruction and how it's different from all the other instruction that goes on in your building. And so one of the things that it should be creating is independence and not dependence. And I know sometimes we get caught up because all parents, see, what happens is lots of times you'll have a kid that needs some assistance, and then once a parent of another child finds out that child's getting some assistance, they feel entitled to that, right? So you have to show them with the data why that wouldn't be appropriate for that student. And so I think when Teresa comes back, it says, does it create progress? Can we show that it creates progress? And do we have data to support every decision we make? And once we get into that mindset, it takes care of a lot of our problems. Now, it doesn't take care of all of our problems. I'm not going to sit here and just, because I know I operate in theory lots of times as a consultant, but I also don't. It's not been all that long ago that I remember being a chairperson, and it certainly is a hard job. And you do face those kinds of things. And you had a great question there. It's a great question to frame our discussion this morning. So, any more questions about this, the overview of the law, the Individuals with Disability Act? You see how it came about there, and we had when we had No Child Left Behind, you had highly qualified teachers that were required, and now that's not required. But now we're looking more at outcomes. It's more about results-driven accountability from the federal level, and it's all about our special education programs providing some meaningful progress. And so let's morph into a little bit. Of course, the Family Education Right to Privacy Act. And Brenda does a tremendous job of confidentiality. She's forgotten more about confidentiality than I'll ever know. She trains it every summer, and she trains our paraprofessionals in it, and all kinds of things. But the Family Education Right to Privacy Act, you guys know what confidentiality is, and you know what's right and what's wrong. And so I would implore you, because it can cause a real problem. And when we're inviting people to meetings and we don't have consent from the parents to do so, and we're sharing information that we shouldn't be sharing, it can cause a real problem. So the Family Education Right to Privacy Act is for all students, and they have the right to inspect and review any all records that the district keeps, and they have the right to request correction of records and the right to consent to disclosure of personally identifiable information contained in education records. But beyond that, I'm not going to go any deeper into confidentiality. You guys kind of know what confidentiality is. I can tell you a quick story. One time, a third grade teacher that had my son, she violated confidentiality right in the grocery store, and I just happened to be standing in the next aisle over, and I heard her do it, so I wailed around there, and I was, like, thought she'd seen a ghost, but those, we have to educate our folks, and we have to be in charge of that kind of situation. So we don't want to have the inappropriate people. And while I'm talking about that, let me talk about substitutes. Substitutes have the right to know about IEPs. Okay, they have the right, and they should be informed. Especially if they're going to be in a long-term situation, they need to be informed about what's going on in those classrooms and who's got programs and who needs this or who needs that. So please have systems in place for your substitutes, because we know attendance is a big issue, right? Not only for our students but for our employees. So as administrators, we need to have plans in place so that we don't get caught with inappropriately providing services just because we've got a substitute in place. Make sure that if there's an order out there that you're following the order. Okay. Secondly, who's the student living with? Because when you get into the definition of parent in the regulation, it really comes down who is the custodial parent there in that situation. So that would be the second thing that I would ask. And then we would have to say, you know what, we may have to push the pause button and get more data. We may have to figure out through the court and ask for some relief in that situation, because you can't go on like that, right? Something's going to end up bad. And when you talk about divorced parents, if divorced parents have joint custody, and lots of times in Kentucky they do, if one denies, you have to go with it. You can't go ahead and test. You can't give services. You have to stop what you're doing. And that was the difficulty in my meeting that I was telling you about, that I botched up, all those years ago, back in, I guess, 2006. And so I know you have, and please ask the questions, because it makes it so much better, because we want to meet your needs as well as you guys, telling you guys to meet everybody else's needs, and so we appreciate you being here. But let's circle back, and we got a little activity, and this is the one. So when we consider how many of you got this one right? The FAPE, is it on there? So what'd you have? Okay, free appropriate public education. Now let's talk about free. What's free mean? It means no cost to parents, right? So usually you can't bring up money in the ARC meeting. That's one of the takeaways for your ARC chairpersons. It's inappropriate to say, well, we don't have that here, or we can't get that. Just kind of avoid that issue if you can. As a seasoned ARC chairperson, when it comes to meaningful progress and data that shows that the student needs it, we pretty much have to get it. And then the other part's public, the public piece. And I'm going fast here. I would typically have you guys break this down and have a discussion about it, but I'm going to have you break just one letter down. Okay. So the public piece is that we've got rules we've got regulations that we have to follow, right? Because we're a public entity, we have to give access. We have to give 504 protection, and we have to do an IP if the student needs specially designed instruction. So, and then the education piece is self-explanatory. Are we doing the proper experiences? Is our core instruction appropriate? Are we doing all those things? Now, we're going to get to the A part. The A part is what I want you all to talk about. What do you think what puts the A inappropriate? Why don't you write down your thoughts? What puts the A inappropriate? Write down your thoughts, and then have a discussion with your elbow partner, and we'll circulate and kind of talk with you about it, and then we'll come back together in just a second here, okay? So just think on your own. Think on your own for a second in a silo. Jot down what you think appropriate means in this context, and then we'll talk about it.
I said follow the data, follow laws and guidelines, fair when compared to others. Mm-hmm. And then we added on there developmentally correct or an age-based.
Okay, good. Very good. And what did you guys say?
We said it allows the student to make progress, and it's based on that student's individual needs.
Okay. Provided public expense under public supervision direction, provided in accordance with the IP, special design instruction. It's all about that. But what makes it appropriate? Evaluation, reevaluation procedures, access to general curriculum, participation with non-disabled peers, ages 3 to 21. Right? So those are all things that we consider. But now let's talk about what Justice Roberts said. He said, number one, and you can write this down if you want to. He said, and if you don't have to, if you don't want to, but just listen. He said, we have to meet the student where they are. Okay? So if we got a kid that's reading on the 3rd grade level, they're in the 7th grade, do we teach them with the 7th grade standard, or do we teach them with the 3rd grade standard? Well, we look at the 7th grade standard, we give access to the 7th grade standard, and we build in supports, and we also work on closing that gap. Okay? So meaningful, meeting where the student is huge, right? Meeting the student where they are. Understand what their baseline is. Being able to look at that IEP and say, what is the current level of function in reading if this student has autism, or if this student has a mild mental disability, or a specific learning disability? What is their current level of function? And if your teachers can't do that, we got to get busy, get them to be able to do that, right? We're going to have an IEP training here on Friday, and hopefully we'll talk about some of that, right? And so the other thing is it needs to be ambitious. We need to push students beyond where we maybe see them, right? We need to dream a bigger dream for them, okay? It needs to be ambitious, and it needs to be meaningful. It needs to meet them where they are, okay? It needs to be intentionally tied to goals and objectives, and it needs to have progress data assigned to it. And we need to use that data to make decisions for those students in terms of the progress they're making. So they need to make appropriate progress in light of their unique circumstances, is exactly the wording that Justice John Roberts used in his Supreme Court decision. And so how did that change? It kind of pushes us beyond a serviceable Chevrolet a little bit. We got to find out what's appropriate. It's got to be individualized. It's got to meet the student's needs. It's got to provide progress. We got to have data to support. Hey, this is where the kid was, and we moved him just a little bit. If we do that, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing in terms of providing a free and appropriate public education. Okay, so and I listened to the podcast, and I've probably told the story so many times we're going to sit hearing, but I listened to a podcast one time, and it was the attorney that represented Andrew's parents. And you know what? He said the number one thing that got them all the way to the Supreme Court, because I didn't tell the story about Andrew yet. Do you know what it was? She's been around. She's heard this till she's blue in the face. Right? But it's progress day. It's progress day. And if we talk about the things that we see, it's almost like, okay, we can read this IP and it's beautiful, but you can see through it. But certainly you can do the 5 days after. And he reminded me, and I was listening to that discussion that David Bateman was talking about. Is one of the special ed gurus out there today. that does he writes a lot of books and things, and one of the books I use for my class at Alice Lloyd. But what he was saying was sometimes it's just a good practice. Nothing says it in the law, but it's a good local practice to call your parents 4 or 5 days after, because the nature of adult learning is that sometimes we don't process it all and it's coming at us. And plus emotion plays in, right? We may be upset with something that's going on, or we may be upset that our child is having these problems. So we have to be empathetic, and we have to try to create a let's collaborate together situation in these meetings. Is so important. And one of the things also that I think, and I appreciate my friend from Breathitt County bringing that up, but I think it's also important that to remember that if you are including the parent, no matter what, if you're making them feel comfortable and they have a voice in there, and that you're keeping the jargon on a level that because everybody's not an educator, right? That you run into. Lots of people are not educators. Most of the people that you run into in the ARC meetings are not educators. And sometimes we say we're thankful for that, right? But at the same time, if you have them help you develop a plan, there's a lot less likelihood most of the time that they're going to fuss about that plan. Okay, so just think about that, and then that courtesy call. How's it going? What did you think about it? Is it still something that you think is going to work? Because we can come back and make changes if you've incorporated this into your thought process and you've thought about it, and we still need to make some changes. We can come back and have another meeting. That brings me to another thing about discipline. And I want to quickly just kind of throw this out there as chairpersons. You need to be careful about having your case managers think that they're only going to have one meeting per child per year. Because if they're having issues and the plans that you write are not correct, one of the things that will get you into litigation trouble is not coming back to the table. Okay? So that suggestion from our friend in Breathitt County can go a long way in that whole process of making sure that we're doing what we need to be doing. And then also just making sure that that we're not forcing these things, and that we're not developing an IEP or a functional behavioral or a behavioral intervention plan, and then just putting it in the corner and not paying any attention to it. And one of the things that we tell chairpersons lots of times, and principals will say, if that kid's showing up on your radar, you better, and he's got an IEP, you better talk to that teacher, and you better get some modifications to that program. You better get some changes, some intervention in, and do some things that are different. Because that's one thing they'll tell you. If you just continue to do the same thing, and the kid then does something that you just have to move on it because it's known worldwide or something, then you got problems, right? Because you've not taken those intermediary steps. If you've only done one intervention per kid, you've not done enough intervention, right? So that goes with your core instruction. That goes with your special instruction. Okay, so certainly that's something to think about. There's another thing too in special education that I want to caution you about: predetermination. Okay, there should never be any predetermination of an IEP. There should never be any predetermination of eligibility decision. Now, do you have conferences and talk about things? Yeah. But you don't put anything in writing, and you don't do anything in regards to a free appropriate public education predetermined. It has to be done by the committee. Okay, so what am I talking about here? When you tell your teachers when they bring that IEP or they send that IEP out 10 days before, right? We're going to get there. We're going to keep pushing, and we're going to get there. But when we send that out, we write the word draft on it. And we write it in our conference summary that we're discussing the draft, and now all the committee members have had the opportunity to participate and collaborate and form their lasting program here, okay? And that we're going to check on you in 5 days and see if it's still what we need to be doing. And that if there are problems with the plan that we put in place, when we take progress and we can't see any progress after 9, 10, 12 weeks, that we come back to the table and we have additional meetings and we adjust it. You don't have to write a new IEP. You don't have to do an amendment, right? And that's there for a reason. We need to be thinking about that, particularly in the realm of behavior, because what we run into is we'll end up suspending, and then we get to the manifestation phase, and we get to the 10th or the 11th day of removal, and we don't know what we say. Well, we didn't do anything in the intermediate, in between, and so we've got to get away from the mindset of predetermination and predetermining, or also predetermining placements, predetermining IEP goals and services, and then making those poor decisions based on just writing an IEP and leaving it. Okay, we got to make some changes occasionally, and probably going to have to do that. One of the things about placement too is I heard this the other day. As I was reading some stuff to prepare for this. The principal went into the meeting. See what you think about this. The principal went into the meeting and said, "We're here today because Johnny will be going to the new alternative school. That's the purpose of the meeting." Now, do you see a problem with that? Is that predetermined? Yes. So we have to. So there's this old adage in special education that says IEP and the needs of the IEP drive the placement decision. So we got this concept called least restrictive environment, and the definition of least restrictive environment is that what? To the maximum extent appropriate, students with disabilities are educated with non-disabled peers, and I'll say to the maximum extent appropriate. Okay, so we got to make a determination based on their needs as to where they get. So if we have a school that has all co-teaching, we got a problem. If we got a school that's got all resource room, we got a problem. We got to have all of those continuing placement options available, and so that's so very important. We see it all the time, don't we, Brenda? We hear tales of high schools or elementary schools having one or the other. And I'm not pointing a finger at anybody. I'm just saying we hear tales, right? We see it. It doesn't take you very long to figure it out when we're visiting. And we're not there to catch you doing something wrong. We're there to help you do things right and be a resource for you and make your jobs easier. And sometimes we just have to say what we see. And sometimes it makes it a little difficult up front, but then it gets better. And we don't have all the answers either. I mean, this is hard stuff. It's hard. It's easy to write about and talk about, but it's hard to implement. And so, here's another. We got the Child Find Guide down there linked for you. That's some guidance for Child Find. But you should have activities to locate, identify, and evaluate a child ages 3 to 21. Anyone that resides in a home, a facility, or residence in your district, you should be on the outlook for them. If you have knowledge that they might have a disability, then we need to be perking our ears up and doing what's right, okay? Either in and out school, may need special education related services. So that's a Child Find. And then who should attend? Quickly, think and jot, who should be in an ARC meeting? Who has to be in an ARC meeting? And are there some differences in who can be there and who's not there? Just really quickly write down what makes up a properly constituted ARC. Put the work in your lap just a second. Down here in the old bullet, or the blurb here, I've got excusal. That gives you a little bit of a scaffold. Okay? Or excuse me, right? All right, who should attend? Regular ed teacher. Okay. Right. And yes. And when you start that meeting, you introduce all those folks? Certainly introduce them, don't you? We invite on that ARC notice, we invite roles, don't we? We invite roles. We invite the regular ed. We don't invite a name. And then when we're reviewing files, we check to see if those roles have been fulfilled. Now, it's hard to have ARC meetings when the chairperson's not there. I know that they happen, but it's hard to have a proper ARC meeting without a chairperson, right? So be careful on that, okay? Signing things that you haven't read. I would implore you to read what you're signing and make sure that because the law judge is coming to you. Okay, and I'm not trying to scare you up here, okay? I'm just telling you the truth. Brenda talks about plain language. And she is plain language, right? And she'll tell you really quickly that if you sign something and you've not been in there, it's a good way to get in trouble, okay? So don't do that. And then regular and special and parent are your four main pieces, and we're going to do whatever we can do in this age of communication to get parents involved. Just a little sidebar on if a parent doesn't attend physically, we've got some things to do. Okay? Now, we think, oh, parent's not here. I run down here. Mr. Can you sign? Can you sign? Over here's regular ed. Can you sign? Related service, can you sign? That's how we did the meeting. But really, we got some things to do with the parents. So we better make sure we've got a good meeting there, right? And if we can get the parent on the telephone, even if they don't attend in person, we still got some things to do. Because the law says they have the right to be notified in writing when you make a change to the program. And I am going to hold that an annual review is making a change in the program, isn't it? You're supposed to review progress. And that brings me to the conference summaries. We review so many conference summaries, and it says annual review, and we get over to the notes, and it never talks about progress monitoring. So make sure when you're reading through and you're getting ready to put your John Henry on there, that they've talked about the purpose, that we've stuck to the purpose. That the purpose is annual review and to review progress and to see where we're going next. And so that's so important as we move through. Any questions or comments about that? Now, further, prior written notice. I asked this question a few years ago in a pretty experienced room. What's a prior written notice in Kentucky? And everybody said ARC notice, right? And I said, oh, is there another prior written notice? Yeah, ARC notice is a prior written notice. You'll never forget it. Was it one of your trade? So you said it was. It's conference summary. It's conference summary. So the parent has the right to get that conference summary before those changes occur. Now, is it problematic if they're not there in person? We got to get it to them in writing. And you've got a policy in place locally that says you've got to get it there. How many days? I can never remember this. It's 10 days. You got 10 days. So we tell our special ed teachers, start 30 to 40 days in advance. Send the notices, get the draft IEP ready, and get things going so that you've got a good plan, right? So that when you do make the decision, and you do have the prior written notice, and it's a conference summary, you can deliver that and you can implement it the next day, okay? If you wait, what's the problem with waiting? Particularly if you're at the high school, if you let an IEP go dead, it's tragic, right? Because you have to report on it. If you have 2, you get a cap, right? So what I'm saying to you is when you're thinking about that, think about, hey, I've got changes. Am I getting close to the IEP running out? And if I'm going to go 10 days beyond the IEP due date, I may have 10 days of compensatory education coming, right? So I've got to be real intentional with my people to make sure that they know their caseloads and they start early enough so that if parents are not attending, that we get the documentation to them before the IEP runs out. Does that make sense? I know that's a lot to take in, but it certainly can catch us. And it can. It's always in the regs. We kind of gloss over it, don't we, in Kentucky? We kind of gloss over it. But because we have lots of meetings where parents are on a call-in, we certainly want to think about that, right? We certainly want to think about where are we with that, okay? So who should attend? And now let's talk about excuse a little bit. There's things to do. There's forms in the Infinite Campus. In the Infinite Campus. You know, it's the Google, the Amazon, the Infinite Campus nowadays, right? So please know, the only people I'm excusing are like related service people. I'm not excusing. It does say you can excuse regular ed, especially, but you better not do that, right? You're not having a properly constituted ARC. The regulation, I think, falls a little short there. But if you got a speech teacher and you can have the OT go over it, or you got a special ed teacher that's really experienced and knowledgeable, and they can go over the changes, that's perfectly okay. That thing's supposed to be agreed upon, and it's supposed to be signed before the meeting happens. You're supposed to have permission. The ARC chairperson is supposed to sign off on it, and the parent's supposed to sign off on it, that it's okay to excuse. Okay, so you know all that, right? All right, let's move on. So there, we said these pieces, and then we'll go over there and look. And then the other thing is for you guys that work with sixth graders and seventh graders, once they hit that 13 years of age, they need to be invited to the meeting, okay? Because we start looking at transition. All right. So we're going to talk about roles and responsibilities. Take just a minute and make you a little. You can even use your placemat. Write on this placemat. I don't want to hurt Stephanie's kids' feelings. No, I'm just kidding. I've already given you plenty of praise for. I want them to write on those so that they're you know what I'm saying. So put ARC chairperson and then put special ed teacher and put regular ed teacher. And let's think about responsibilities. Let's think about all the jobs. Why is a regular ed teacher important to be in there? Why does a chairperson have to be in there? What's their responsibility? And what's the special ed teacher's responsibility? Try to think about that and then have a conversation about it.